Greetings, I'm Karen Colligan. Welcome to the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. I'm the founder of a leadership organization called PeopleThink, where I created the Keep It Real leadership program that equips and elevates emerging and advancing leaders. It's all online, and it can be done anywhere, and it can be done at any time. What I know for sure is all leaders lead differently, and that's the beauty of leadership. It's so important to understand what your unique leadership style is. Now, that word is worth repeating. Unique, because everyone has their own leadership style, which will inform how you're going to help your team and organization move forward. You got to be real, and you got to be bold, and you got to drive to take action. Because let's face it, people look to their leaders for vision. They look to their leaders for coaching and growth opportunities. And that's why, as a leader, you want to be crystal clear about your unique leadership style and competencies. The whole purpose of the Let's Talk Leadership podcast is to speak to a variety of leaders who are in different industries with different titles at different levels to better understand their unique way of leading. We're going to ask each leader the same 6 questions so we can provide you with a diverse way of looking at leadership. We want you to find those treasures that will help you be the best leader only you can be. So let's get moving and talk to our next leadership guest. In this episode, I am thrilled to be speaking to Mike Cloutier, who is the founding partner of Accelera Canada Limited. We're going to hear all about Mike's approach to leadership. So Mike, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you today and talk with you about one of my favorite subjects.
Good. Let's get into it. So before we get into all the leadership conversation we're going to have, so Mike, tell us a little bit about who you are and what Accelera Canada is all about before we get into our leadership conversation.
Well, thanks. My story goes back about 40 years in terms of my engagement in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. I've had a variety of roles throughout my career, but really in the last, I would say, 35 years, I've been in what people would deem a leadership role, responsible for either significant parts of a business or significant parts of a business and people. Mm-hmm. But that's really just the corporate me. Who I really am is a proud husband, father, and recently a grandfather. So I like to think about myself in a very total, very well-rounded way whenever possible. That has certainly served me well over the years in terms of my leadership journey.
Nice. And tell us a little bit about Accelera. What's that all about, Mike?
Accelera Canada, I founded the organization about 5 years ago now, and actually my first work started there in the Bay Area. And what I was looking to do was to accelerate the availability of innovative healthcare solutions for Canadians. All too often, due to misconceptions or resource priorities or whatever the situation may be, organizations really look at Canada as a very late stage market entry from a commercial perspective. And one of the things that worried me when I spent a great deal of my career in rare and orphan diseases, and particularly in pediatric medicine, was that any delay in bringing these innovations to Canada could be disastrous for patients, for caregivers, for healthcare professionals. So my goal was to try and get out in front of small organizations who hadn't really been considering Canada for those reasons I mentioned, and try and get them to start thinking about coming to Canada sooner and to bring these novel innovations to Canada quicker so that Canadians could benefit. And that's, we started 5 years ago, and we've been tremendously successful in bringing a significant number of companies and products to Canada. So I'm very proud of what we've achieved so far.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. And Mike, I've known you for some time, and every time that we've worked together, it's always been around that leadership and being innovative and thinking really forward, like so that you could bring new ways of doing business to your organizations that I worked with you. So this is just one more thing that you've done. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation because I know how much you care about leadership and how important it is to the wealth and health of an organization. So yes, love, love, love that. Thank you. The first question is, okay, tell us how you define leadership. I mean, when we think about leadership, it's just one word and everybody's got such different viewpoints of it. And they're so passionate about what they think. And so I like to start off our conversation. Just do tell Mr. Mike, how do you define leadership?
Yeah, well, this is a great start because you're absolutely right. The definition of leadership can be so broad. There's no real right or wrong answer, I don't think, and that's the beauty of being on a leadership journey. I think I kind of split it into two views. The first is that leadership isn't about titles and roles and positions. That leaders lead whenever they're called upon to be leaders, or when individuals step up because it's time to lead. We will probably talk a lot today about the corporate environment and experiences related to our practices in the business world, but leadership really goes very much beyond that. And so I want to make sure that I'm clear that when I speak about leadership, I really think about it in a much broader perspective in terms of individuals stepping up and really leading from out front. I have developed my own style about that, but I really think that leadership is defined by people willing to step forward and be the leader, to demonstrate direction and where we're going and how we're going, and really come follow me, regardless of what the capacity for that might be.
You said something that I want to really emphasize, and this is that whole thing about leaders. It's not about the title. When I look at organizations, I think about the individual performers who really step up and step forward, and that individual performers truly are leaders as well. And so if a leader says, I am a leader because I have my title of senior director, vice president, CEO, it doesn't matter what the title is, and they hide behind that, well, then they're not stepping up and forward. And there's so many individual performers who do that incredibly well. So definitely agree with that. So now we start thinking about values and who we are as individuals. And I think about values as kind of our guiding light. It's our North Star. It's really how we make decisions. It's how we know when we make a decision, it's the right one, because it's the core of who we are. What are your three values as a leader? So when you think about yourself as a leader, what are those three values?
Yeah, and I think just to create some context, I mean, I think the greatest influences that I've had from a leadership perspective came from two areas. One, servant leadership, as was originally defined by Greenleaf, and sort of that whole concept of being in service to others or the greater good. And then, certainly Colin's work related to level 5 leadership and the whole concept of humility, an understanding of the importance of being confident without having ego. And I say that because then it leads to sort of, so what are the values that I think are most critical, or at least that I've tried to demonstrate, emulate, mentor. The first for me, without question, has to be integrity. I think that integrity is so important. I think it's defined in so many ways. I like to think about it as, how you act when people aren't looking is sort of one interesting perspective.
Absolutely.
I've also referred to, would your mom be proud of you if she saw you or heard you right now? Things like that. But integrity is so absolutely critical because, when it's all said and done, our ability to look in the mirror and our ability for us to criticize and to understand ourselves is so important, and integrity is important. The second thing for me is courage, because leadership there are so many times when doing the right thing the right way is the hardest
Yeah.
thing to do, the most difficult, the most painful, the least attractive. And having the courage to really do it anyway, because you know it is the right thing, the right way, the toughest. It takes incredible courage, not and courage, not in a way that's, you know, the courage of, say, frontline workers who being courageous just by putting themselves physically out there and risking their health, but it's the courage to know that people may never speak to you again because you did the right thing the right way, and risking relationships. Those things, as human beings, those are tough things to deal with. We don't, generally speaking, like to not be liked, but
Yeah.
your role as a leader is not to be liked. It's to do the right thing the right way. So courage. The last element for me, and I'm not sure I would really say it's a value, but it's just so important to me, is achievement. You have to do what you say you're going to do. You have to achieve. You have to make commitments, and you have to be true to those commitments. I think great leaders have great followers because they demonstrate the ability to achieve and get things done. And people want to follow leaders who get things done because people want to get things done.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I would say those are my three.
It's interesting how connected integrity, courage, and achievement and your explanation of those three really are, Mike. If you think about all three of them as well, there's an emotional component to each of those. So it's not like a black and white. There's not a right or a wrong. It's about that emotional piece of saying, you know what, this is the right thing to do for me, for the team, for the organization. And therefore, I'm going to move forward with that. And people may look at the black and white piece of it and say, he is crazy because it doesn't add up. And the emotional piece says, it may not look like it adds up, and it adds up. Yeah. Really nice.
Well, and I think when you put that track record up, people start to believe in your leadership, and they believe in you because you've demonstrated that no, like, I know you think I'm crazy right now, but trust me,
yes,
this will work.
Yes.
But you gotta be with me. It only works when we do it together. You know, it only works when you really believe and you follow.
Yes.
I'll be a great leader if you can be a great follower.
Yes.
Yeah, but you got to earn it.
I was just going to say, you got to earn it. And you also have to recognize, as a leader, you also have to follow, because you may not know everything. And so you may lead, be the leader of an organization. There's times you're going to follow the people in that organization because you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's right. And that's courage. That takes courage. Okay. So my third question is obviously we're going through an enormous amount of transition and change between the global pandemic and the social awakening and the economic implications of both of those big things going on. The question is, how do you lead through transition and change, and how do you do it? Because it's complicated, and it's complicated by geography. It's complicated by organization. It's complicated by industry. It's complicated by individuals. So how do you lead through transition and change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's probably 4 or 5 hours of conversation here, but I'll try and distill it down to maybe a couple of things that I think are really most important from my perspective right now, and hypercritical. But there are so many things that are required. So I would say the very first thing at a time like this is communications. I think that highly effective communication is so critical. Being very present, and not physically so much, although when possible, of course, but really being present, being there, communicating, staying engaged, and really making sure that people have that level of connectivity. When we are fractured, not just in terms of time and space, but I mean, even in ideology, in in views, in circumstance. People are dealing with so much right now, and it's so incredibly complex. And not that life hasn't been complex before, but it's a new kind of complex. That's all. It's just an additive kind of complexity. So, communications, hypercritical, clear communications, very exact communications, taking the time to make sure that people understand, taking the time to listen. Listening is way more important than speaking, because you can only speak effectively once you truly understand. And if you can't listen, you can't understand. And then the expectations that are set through good communications really then, formulate, I think, the opportunity for success and for cohesion, and for people ensuring that we are being equally concerned about the issues we're dealing with as we are about the people that are dealing with the issues. So that brings me to my second point, which is really around heart and mind. I can't think of a time when it's been more important to make sure that our hearts, our emotional self, are linked with our intellectual self. Our ability to rationalize and reason, to work through systematically our problems and our issues, but to keep a humanity to what we're doing while we're doing that. It's just, and it's difficult at times like this to be able to keep both. I feel personally torn sometimes to be going strictly with my head and leaving my heart behind, or to go strictly with my heart and to leave my head behind. I feel those moments of where I'm being torn, and having to take the time to stop and to think about how I'm going to approach this, to make sure, am I bringing the totality of myself to this? Am I making sure that I'm bringing both my emotional intelligence and my emotional being forward with my intelligence, with my knowledge, with my capability from an intellectual perspective? So I'd say those are the two things I think that are most critical for me right now, amongst many others, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we could go on and on about this question, and so you said a couple things that I just don't want to lose, because when you first talked about that clear and exact communication, you talked about being present, and then you clarified it with, we have to listen. So being present doesn't mean I just show up on a call and there I am and hello, how are you? It means that I am asking questions, that I stop and I hear. Lots of times in trainings, I'll say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So like, shut up already. So it's really, really important to listen and stay engaged. But this whole thing around head and heart, and when we went into this whole pandemic, nobody was prepared. And talk about change and transition. I mean, I don't think there's a person on the planet that ever expected us to be in where we are today. And so if we just lead with our head saying this is X, Y, and Z, and don't think about the pull that so many of us have in our heart, that can't possibly be leadership. You've really got to combine that IQ and EQ together and recognize everybody's dealing with this differently. And what we also know, Mike, about transition and change is it's what about me? What about me? What about me? And so we have to help them recognize, okay, I've got your back on this one. So I'm going to communicate, I'm going to listen, and oh, by the way, I've got a heart as well. Yeah, that's beautiful. Can I work for you, Mike? I just want to work for you.
In a heartbeat.
Oh, good. Okay, we're in. We're on. After this call, we'll talk.
Okay.
Great. So okay. So we understand about transition and change. Now, again, we're in this crazy place. And if we as individuals and we as leaders don't continue our learning journey and our curiosity and how we're going to continually grow in this place, then what happens is we get stuck, and we have to bring new ways of thinking as we're continuing our leadership journey. So what are some of the things you do to continue to learn during this time, or any helpful hints of tools or resources that are available to folks to continue their learning journey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just the concept of of a learning journey is the most critical element. You know, I was very fortunate early in my career when was first put in a leadership role, which was actually in marketing, and I didn't have people management responsibility in that job. I had accountability to get something accomplished through people that I didn't have positional power over. I really had to be a leader of influence as opposed to, back in the day, and given my age, there were different kinds of leadership styles that used to work back then that don't work today. But
Exactly.
but back then, that more authoritative kind of, but and not that I was comfortable with that. But anyways, it was explained to me that we, those of us who choose to be leaders, have to be on a leadership journey, that it's never done. It's not complete. You never reach the end. But if you're excited by the prospects of learning and the fact that it's really about the journey and not the end game anyway, then you're really going to love being a leader. So first of all, blessed to have worked for an individual that explained it to me that way. I set upon a journey and I've continued to stay on that journey. And I love your question because it gives me an opportunity to speak about the fact that it's a journey. I've always had a coach. I was lucky enough to work in an industry and a company that had the resources available to allow me to invest in having a coach. And so I started using other people's money to pay for my coaching, which was nice.
Smart.
But even when I reached different stages of my career where the organization or my own company as such wasn't going to pay for it, I just invested of my own money. And so I've always had a coach and I've always kept a coach. And that's probably the most important element of my journey that's kept me fresh. Obviously, I do what I'm sure hundreds of people do. I love to read books, whether it be physically or audio. There are so many great books every year, but then there's some real classics to go back to and capture value from. I haven't taken any leadership courses in a while, but that was a big part of my journey in the past. And I'm just in the process now of evaluating a specific program. Given my ripe old age of 62, I still think that there's, time for me to learn more in a course. So I'm looking at a actual leadership program right now. But, the last thing I would say, and probably I should have started here, but in a way, maybe it's more about recency versus primacy in terms of my point, but my network is this incredible source of leadership. My leader relationships, my friends, my colleagues, the people that I've worked with in the past or work with today, the dialogue around leadership every day, every single day, something happens on either LinkedIn or just on a phone call or on a Zoom call, but leadership is right there. And if you are open to receiving messages and giving messages, because it's a two-way street. I think if you're going to be on this journey, you have to input into the journey for others as well. But I just find my network is such a valuable tool if you just, as we were talking, if you just listen and absorb, So yeah, those are the things. I mean, they're all important, and all those tools are available to use when you can use them.
Yeah, exactly. And the important element about that is you pick and choose what's going to work at the time. And so something like picking up the phone and actually talking to one of your colleagues in your network, you know what? That's a part of your leadership journey. There's no question about it. And then there's other days you're going to say, nope, I got to read. And then that's your leadership journey. The most important thing, what I believe, is really about the curiosity, and that, as you said, you can't stop it. And once you stop, then, I always say, if you're going to stop learning, just go home. Just go home.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel.
Curiosity. I'm glad you made that point, because it reminds me, I think the book is Think Like Da Vinci. There's like 5 or 7 principles. I thank God I keep all these books. So actually, when we're done today, I'm actually going to go upstairs and verify my own reference here. But curiosity, and I forget the Italian term, but he speaks to this. And I remember my coach saying to me one time, "Do you consider yourself to be a curious person?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm incredibly curious." And he goes, "Yeah, how many preset stations on your radio do you have in your car?" I said, "None. I listen to one station the whole time. I get in the car, but the thing goes, doesn't sound very curious to me."
Wise guy, who asked you anyway? Well, that's a nice way to look at it. I started thinking, I have three, so I just must be incredibly curious, Mike. Three stations.
Well, I can tell you, I got about 15 now.
Now, oh yeah,
I
absolutely.
probably still only listen to.
All righty.
Uh,
So you've been on this leadership journey and you're learning. How do you get your folks that you work with to think about leadership, and what kind of development and growth opportunities do you try and give them or make available to them so that they can take advantage of some of those?
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging. Just the economics of it are difficult at times. That the time investment as well can be very difficult. When I first left college, I sold safety equipment before I got into the healthcare field. Although I guess one could argue it was somewhat related. But I used to go into factories and sell equipment to keep people safe on the job. And the first budget to be cut in any economic downturn was the safety budget. I know it sounds crazy, but let's face it, if it meant laying somebody off or providing a little less safety equipment, I mean, they would rather keep people on and take a little bit of a risk. And I know it sounds crazy, but you can understand it.